Welcome to our literary journey. Hello, dear listeners. Today I invite you to an extraordinary journey to the heart of rural Brazil in the 1970s, where ancestral secrets still echo through the hills and justice sometimes must be excavated from the depths of memory. Prepare to meet Rosa Tavares, a woman whose silent strength will defy destiny and whose heart will hold the key to unraveling a conspiracy that spanned generations. Among haunted mansions, waters that guard mysteries and faith that moves mountains, we'll discover that sometimes what seems lost forever is just waiting for the right hands to find it. Tell me in the comments, from which city are you joining us on this journey? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps me so much to continue bringing these stories that touch the soul. Audito year 1973, São Pedro das Águas Claras, interior of Minas Gerais. The March sun beat mercilessly on the dirt road when Rosa Tavares adjusted the baby on her hip and extended her free hand toward the 5-year-old girl. Dust clung to her skin like dried tears, and the weight of the few belongings on her shoulder seemed to carry all the injustice in the world. There was no weeping in her dark eyes, only a dignity that her brothers-in-law had failed to break, even with words sharp as knives. Francisco and Benedito Tavares, men whose greed grew like weeds, had spat upon her widowhood as if it were leprosy. "Woman without a man brings misfortune," said Francisco, driving her away like an unwanted animal. "Ever since Jose died drowning, she only brings bad luck to this house." Miguel, his 12 years prematurely carrying the weight of manhood, walked ahead with clenched fists. The boy understood more than he should about the cruelty of adults. Ana clung to her mother's skirt, her little eyes still not comprehending why she no longer had a home. Vicente, the 18-month-old baby, coughed a cough that came from deep in his chest, as if injustice itself had lodged in his tiny lungs. Rosa rocked him against her chest, murmuring prayers that smelled of hope and desperation mixed together. The morning had the bitter taste of humiliation. 8 months had passed since Jose left this world, taken by the treacherous waters of the dam on a July afternoon that still haunted Rosa's dreams. He departed without leaving a will, without leaving anything but 3 children and a wife, who now discovered how fragile the protection of marriage could be. The brothers-in-law were clear in their sentence. The house was theirs by right, and she, an intruder, who needed to learn her place in the world. As if mourning weren't enough, Rosa now carried the burden of uncertainty, the few milrays in her pocket, weighing less than a feather before the grim future. The road stretched like a scar across the landscape, leading nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Heat danced in waves over the red earth, creating mirages that mocked the thirst beginning to tighten their throats. But Rosa continued step after step, because stopping meant accepting defeat. It was when the hill took shape on the horizon, crowned by a silhouette that seemed to emerge from an ancient dream, that destiny decided to whisper its first secret. But would Rosa be prepared to discover that her misfortune was only the first link in a chain extending across generations? The mansion rose against the afternoon sky like a cathedral of stones and secrets, its glassless windows blinking like empty eyes toward the family of wanderers. Hacienda Santa Isabel had known days of glory when its coffee plantations kissed the horizon and its terraces echoed with laughter from children who were now dust. Rosa stopped at the base of the hill, feeling her heart beat stronger. There was something familiar about that ruin, not a specific memory, but a sensation that came from some deep place in her soul, like the distant echo of a forgotten lullaby. "Mama, is this house haunted?" Ana asked, with the crystalline honesty of children, pointing to the vines that embraced the walls like witches' hair. "No, my love," Rosa replied, though her own voice carried an uncertainty she tried to hide. "It's just a very old house that's sleeping." Miguel, always observant, frowned and looked over his shoulder. Throughout the entire walk, he'd had the strange sensation that someone was following them, a shadow that moved when he wasn't looking directly, as if the past itself had materialized to accompany their steps. "Mom," he whispered, approaching her, "there's someone behind us." Rosa turned, scanning the dusty road with attentive eyes. She saw only tall grass swaying in the warm breeze and a sabia bird singing its melancholy on a fence post. But there was something in the air, a presence that made the hair on her neck stand up, as if ancient spirits were testing her courage. The climb up the hill was arduous. Vicente cried softly, his labored breathing mixing with the wind that whispered stories through the twisted branches of the angicos. With each step, Rosa felt as if she were going back in time, walking through decades until reaching a place that existed more in memory than in reality. The iron gate had long since disappeared, leaving only the stone pillars ornamented with shields worn by time. The letters engraved on the main arch were still legible: Hacienda Santa Isabel, 1869. Rosa ran her fingers over the marks, feeling history pulse beneath her skin like ancient veins. The garden was now a labyrinth of tall grass and wild roses that perfumed the air with an almost phantasmagorical sweetness. Jasmines embraced the terrace columns, creating curtains of white flowers that danced in the golden afternoon light. When they finally reached the main entrance, Rosa hesitated. The solid wooden doors stood ajar, like an invitation or a trap. The interior exhaled the smell of old wood, decades of dust, and something more, perhaps the phantom aroma of French perfume and Cuban cigars from better times. The first night was a nightmare of dancing shadows and inexplicable sounds. Rosa and the children settled in the old dining room, where there was still an imposing table under sheets that looked like shrouds. Vicente wouldn't stop coughing, and each echo amplified by the high walls made Anna shrink closer against her mother's chest. But it was when the full moon illuminated the broken stained glass of the annex chapel that Rosa saw the silhouette standing on the terrace, a woman in a dark dress with greyish hair, motionless as a statue, looking directly at her through the jasmine curtains. Who was the silent guardian who seemed to know secrets that not even time could erase? Morning arrived with the song of bemtevis and the aroma of coffee that came from nowhere, floating through the house like a perfume of memories. Rosa awoke with Vicente clinging to her chest and Anna still dreaming softly, wrapped in her skirt like a cocoon. Miguel was already up, exploring the corners of the room with the brave curiosity of boys. He was the first to see the woman in the kitchen, stirring something in an iron pot over a wood stove that seemed to have been lit by phantom hands. "Mom," he whispered, nudging Rosa urgently. "There's a lady in the kitchen." Rosa rose slowly, smoothing her hair and adjusting the dress wrinkled by the poorly slept night. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold tile floor as she headed toward the heart of the house, where the aroma of coffee and fresh bread grew like a promise of comfort. The woman had her back turned, her greyish hair gathered in a low bun, wearing a dark dress and an apron that had known better decades. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had made those gestures thousands of times, like an ancient dance between her and the kitchen utensils. "Good morning," Rosa said softly, not wanting to startle the apparition. The woman turned slowly, and Rosa found herself looking into the wisest eyes she had ever encountered, eyes that carried stories like a river carries sediment, dark and deep as moonless nights. "I am Candida Silva," said the woman with a voice that was a rough whisper, like dry leaves being stepped on. "And you are little Isabel's granddaughter." The world seemed to stop. Rosa blinked, trying to process words that made no immediate sense, but that resonated in her soul like forgotten truths. Isabel was the name of her maternal great-grandmother, a woman who had died when Rosa was still a child, leaving only fragmented stories and a certain melancholy that ran through the family's women like an inheritance impossible to refuse. "I don't understand," Rosa stammered, holding Vicente tighter against her chest. Candida approached slowly, her eyes studying every feature of Rosa's face as if reading an ancient map. Her hands that knew hard work, marked by decades of care and service, touched Rosa's chin gently, lifting her face toward the light entering through the kitchen window. "The same eyes," she murmured almost to herself, "the same mouth that smiled even in storms. You have Andrade blood running through your veins, child." Miguel and Anna approached timidly, fascinated by the mysterious woman who spoke in riddles and prepared coffee as if she had inhabited that kitchen for eternity. "You're hungry," Candida declared, not as a question but as a fact known by maternal intuition. "Sit down. This table knows many stories, and today it will know one more." She served coffee with milk in agate cups and homemade bread that still steamed as if it had been taken from the oven at that exact moment. Vicente stopped crying for the first time in days, hypnotized by the gentle smile of the strange woman. "I cared for this house for 50 years, Candida explained, while cutting generous slices of bread. "Since I was young and worked for the Andrade family. After everyone left, I continued here. Someone needed to keep the secrets." Rosa felt an electric current run down her spine. There was something in Candida's voice, in the way she looked at the corners of the kitchen, as if seeing people who were no longer there, that told her she was about to discover truths that would change everything. "What secrets?" she asked, though part of her feared the answer. Candida smiled, a smile that carried 50 years of silence and patience. The ones that will return to you what should never have been taken away, my dear. The ones that will bring justice for the dead and the living. But would Rosa be prepared to discover that her entire life had been built upon a lie that had cost the lives of good men? The afternoon fell like a golden veil over the house when Candida led Rosa to the terrace facing the dam. The water reflected the fire-colored sky, and the wind carried the perfume of jasmines mixed with something older, perhaps the smell of tears that the earth had absorbed over decades. The children played in the garden, Vicente finally breathing better in the pure air of the hill, his laughter echoing among the ruins like long-forgotten music. Miguel had found an old cartwheel and pretended to be a bandeirante exploring the sertão, while Anna collected wildflowers to make crowns that would beautify her mother's hair. "Sit down, child," said Candida, indicating a rocking chair that creaked like ancient memories. "It's time you know who you really are." Rosa settled in, feeling the weight of years in the worn planks of the terrace. Candida remained standing, looking toward the dam as if she could see through the dark waters to the bottom, where secrets slept like blind fish. "Your great-grandmother Isabel was the most beautiful of Joaquim Andrade's daughters, the owner of these lands," Candida began, her voice gaining the hypnotic rhythm of someone who had told this story many times to silent walls. "She married Joaquim Silva, a good man who loved this land as much as he loved his wife. But goodness sometimes is a weakness that evil men exploit." The wind swayed the jasmine curtains, creating dancing shadows that seemed like figures from the past moving across the terrace. Rosa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon's coolness. "In 1923, Candida continued, Tomás Andrade, Isabel's brother, joined with Colonel Tavares, the ancestor of the men who expelled you from home. They had hunger for land and thirst for gold, and this hacienda was too rich to remain in the hands of a woman and her gentle husband." Rosa gripped the arms of the chair, feeling the first waves of a terrible truth approaching like a storm on the horizon. "They forged documents." Candida's voice was now a rough whisper, like dry leaves in the wind. "They invented debts, bribed officials, transformed truth into lies, and lies into law. But Joaquim Silva was an honest man. He discovered the deception and threatened to denounce them." The dam waters seemed darker now, reflecting not the golden sky anymore, but something somber and ancient that slumbered at the bottom. In July 1925, they found Joaquim floating in this same dam. "They said he had drunk too much and fallen alone, but I was washing clothes at the water's edge that night, hidden among the reeds." Candida's voice trembled like an old viola string. "I saw when they held him under the water until he stopped struggling." Rosa brought her hand to her throat, feeling as if the air had become too dense to breathe. Her mind struggled to process the information. The Tavares, murderers 50 years ago, and she married to a descendant of that same family. "Isabel became pregnant a few days after her husband's death," Candida continued, silent tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. "She knew the truth, but had no proof. Grief ate at her soul like rust eats iron. She died in childbirth, but before that made me swear to keep the secrets, until someone of her blood came to seek justice." Silence stretched between the two women like an invisible river. Rosa looked at her children playing innocently in the garden, and felt the weight of 50 years of injustice descending upon her shoulders like a lead mantle. "My husband, José," she whispered, the words coming with difficulty. "They said he drowned because he drank too much." Candida turned to her, her ancient eyes shining with a light that wasn't entirely human, the light of someone who had carried secrets for too long. "The Tavares never changed their methods, child. The dam was always too convenient for accidents that weren't accidents." How many other terrible truths slept in the silences of this house, waiting only for the right words to awaken? The chapel annexed to the mansion held the phantom perfume of incense and withered flowers, its stone walls echoing with the weight of prayers whispered over decades. Candida led Rosa through the small nave, where dusty wooden benches lined up before an altar that still displayed an image of Saint Isabel faded by time. "This is where Isabel came to pray every day after her husband's death," Candida murmured, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the baptismal font. "And it was here that she hid her last secrets." Rosa watched the elderly woman walk to the wall behind the altar, where a dark wooden cross marked the center of the composition. With movements practiced by years of repetition, Candida pressed two specific points in the masonry. First a carved rose on the right, then a dove on the left. A soft click echoed through the chapel, followed by the creak of hinges long unlubricatable. A section of the wall opened like a secret door, revealing a small dark space that exhaled the aroma of ancient paper and dried lavender. 50 years I kept this secret, said Candida, her hands trembling slightly as she lit a yellow wax candle. 50 years waiting for the right person. The secret room was little larger than a confessional, with walls lined with shelves where leather-bound diaries aligned, yellowed letters tied with faded ribbons, and a small dark wooden chest ornamented with tarnished metal details. Rosa entered the sacred space with the reverence of someone entering a temple. Her fingers touched the spine of one of the diaries, feeling the smooth texture of worked leather and the initials engraved in golden letters, E.R.S., Esperanza Andrade Silva. Isabel changed her name when she married, Candida explained softly. Esperanza was her baptismal name. She said it was necessary to keep hope alive, even in the darkest moments. Rosa opened the first diary carefully, as if fearing the pages would crumble at her touch. The calligraphy was delicate and slanted, written with ink that had darkened to a deep brown over the decades. The first entry was dated June 15, 1895, when Esperanza was only 15 years old. Today, Joaquim asked me to marry him under the jasmine tree. He said my eyes shone like stars on water. Papa gave his blessing and Mama cried with joy. I never felt so happy. This hacienda will be our paradise on earth. Rosa turned the pages slowly, following her great-grandmother's life through words that seemed to pulse with their own life. There were descriptions of balls in the big house, of the birth of the first children, of the prosperity of the coffee plantations, of the simple joy of a life built on true love and honest work. But as the years advanced, the tone of the writings changed. The letters became tighter, nervous, as if the very calligraphy reflected the growing anguish of the writer. March 10, 1923, Tomás came again with his papers and his lies. Joaquim is worried. He says there's something wrong with the documents my brother presents. Greed has transformed Tomás into someone I no longer recognize. I will pray to Saint Isabel to protect us. July 2, 1925. My heart is heavy as stone. Joaquim left this morning saying he had discovered the truth about the false papers. I promised to wait for him for dinner, but the hours pass and he doesn't return. The wind blows strangely over the dam, as if carrying omens. July 3, 1925. They found my beloved floating in the dam. They say he drank and fell, but Joaquim was not a man to drink beyond measure. Candida came to me with eyes full of tears and secrets. She saw what they did. But what good is truth when power writes the laws? The last entry was written in shaky handwriting, as if the hand that wrote it struggled against its own weakness. December 15, 1925. I feel life fading from me like water between fingers. The baby grows in my womb, but my heart no longer has strength to continue. I hid the evidence where waters guard the dead, under the stone cross, at the depth of 3 fathoms. May God forgive my cowardice for not fighting more. May my blood one day return to claim what is theirs. Rosa raised her moist eyes to Candida, who watched her with the infinite patience of someone who had waited half a century for this moment. The evidence, Rosa whispered. She hid the evidence. But where exactly was the stone cross mentioned in the writings, and what would it reveal about the destiny awaiting the true heirs of Hacienda Santa Isabel? The afternoon was dying in shades of orange and purple when the sound of horses and harsh voices cut through the hacienda's peace like knives. Rosa was in the secret room, still immersed in the pages of Esperanza's diaries, when Miguel burst into the chapel with a face pale with terror. "Mom, there are armed men climbing the hill," he shouted, his voice echoing off the ancient stones. "Uncle Francisco and Uncle Benedito are with them." Rosa felt her blood freeze in her veins. Quickly, she stored the diaries in the chest and closed the secret compartment, while Candida blew out the candle with hands that trembled from decades of repressed fear. "Take the children to the basement," Candida whispered urgently. "I'll handle them." "No," Rosa said with a firmness that surprised her. "I'm not going to hide anymore. If they came for me, let them find me standing." The men arrived like a storm of hatred and dust, their faces distorted by greed and alcohol. Francisco Tavares dismounted with predator movements, his small eyes scanning the house as if he already possessed it. Benedito followed him, more hesitant, but equally determined. "Where is the tramp?" Francisco bellowed, his voice echoing through the empty corridors. "Rosa, we know you're there." Rosa emerged from the chapel with the erect posture of a queen, Vicente in her arms and Ana clinging to her skirt. Miguel positioned himself at her side, small but brave like a soldier defending his kingdom. "What do you want here?" she asked, her voice cutting the air like a sharp blade. Francisco laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound that made birds flee from nearby trees. "We came to get what's ours," he said, spitting on the dusty ground, "and to teach you that a widow woman has no right to anything beyond what men allow." "This house doesn't belong to you," Rosa replied, surprising herself with her own courage. "It does belong," Benedito shouted, taking a step forward. "José was our brother, and everything that was his is now ours by right." It was then that Candida appeared on the terrace, silent as a shadow, but carrying an authority that made the men hesitate. There was something in her eyes, an ancient and dangerous light, that made them instinctively retreat. "This land never belonged to the Tavares," she said, her voice low but clear as a church bell. "And you know that better than anyone." Francisco hardened his face, the mask of false civility finally falling. "Shut up, old black woman. You're nothing but an invader like her." The error was fatal. By uttering those words loaded with contempt and ignorance, Francisco had sealed not only his destiny, but revealed the true rotten nature that ran through his veins like ancestral poison. Candida smiled, a smile that carried 50 years of patience and accumulated wisdom. "Invader," she repeated softly. "I who washed the diapers of the Andrade children, I who cried over their coffins, I who kept their secrets when men like you tried to bury the truth." Francisco lost his patience completely. He signaled to the thugs he had brought, men with hard faces and soiled consciences, and they spread across the terrace like vultures over carrion. "Burn everything," he ordered, his voice distilling pure hatred. "The house, the old woman, the bastard and her cubs. Burn everything and end this story once and for all." It was when Vicente began to cry, not the common cry of a baby, but a sound that seemed to come from some deep and ancestral place, as if it carried the lament of all the injustices committed on those lands over decades. And it was that sound, the cry of an innocent child before human evil, that attracted the attention of something greater than the greed of small men. The church bell in the village began to ring, though it was an improper time for bells, and on the road a cloud of dust announced the arrival of horsemen that Francisco hadn't expected. But would the arrival of these men be enough to stop the fury of decades of corruption, or would it only delay the inevitable reckoning? Father Antonio arrived like an avenging angel mounted on a bay horse, followed by 6 men from the village, whose faces Rosa vaguely recognized from Sunday masses. The priest was a tall, thin man, with grayish beard and eyes that seemed to read souls like open books. "Francisco Tavares," his voice thundered across the hill like distant thunder. "What does this violence mean on sacred ground?" Francisco hesitated, the priest's moral authority creating a crack in his savage determination. The thugs slightly lowered their weapons, religious instinct still functioning in some forgotten corner of their brutalized consciences. "This is none of your business, Father," Francisco muttered, but his voice had lost its previous strength. "We're just reclaiming what belongs to us." "Belongs?" Father Antonio dismounted with agility that belied his age, approaching the group with firm steps. "Since when is violence against widows and orphans anyone's right?" Candida approached the priest and whispered something in his ear that made the holy man's eyes widen. He looked at Rosa with renewed interest, then at Francisco with something that seemed like disgust. "Domingos!" the priest called, addressing a dark, nervous man who was among those accompanying him. "Tell these men what you told me this afternoon." Domingos Silva, Rosa recognized the surname that Candida had mentioned in the accounts, shrugged and looked at the ground as if about to confess a mortal sin. I don't know anything, Father," he stammered. Francisco and Benedito exchanged significant looks, and Rosa perceived there was more history there than appeared. "Domingos," Father Antonio said softly, but with unquestionable authority, "you swore on the Bible, a man cannot lie before God and the saints." The worker raised his eyes, and Rosa saw in them the same fear she had recognized in her own reflection so many times, the fear of the weak before the powerful, of the honest before the corrupt. I was fishing at the dam that night," Domingos began, his voice little more than a whisper. "The night José died." Francisco stepped forward, threatening, "Be careful what you're going to say, Domingos. Remember your family." But Father Antonio interposed himself between the two men, and there was something in his posture that transformed the cassocked man into a soldier of God. "Continue, son," he encouraged. "José wasn't drunk." The words came out like dammed water finally finding a crack in the dike. "He was lucid and furious. He said he had discovered false papers, lies about lands that didn't belong to who claimed to possess them. Rosa felt her heart accelerate. Vicente stopped crying, as if he too understood the importance of that moment. They arrived in pairs, Domingos continued, now looking directly at Francisco and Benedito. They said José was causing problems, that he needed to learn to stay quiet. I hid among the reeds, afraid. I saw when they held him under the water. The silence that followed was dense as melted lead. Francisco and Benedito were pale, but still tried to maintain the pose of innocence. "Lies!" Francisco shouted. "The old man is senile. He makes up stories." But Domingos hadn't finished. At the end, Francisco said something I never forgot. "Now only the widow remains, and she won't be a problem. Woman without man has no rights, and if she insists, she can have the same fate." Rosa felt as if the world had stopped spinning. All the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit. José's death, the haste to throw her out of the house, the violence with which they treated her. They had not only killed her husband, they planned to silence her too if she became too inconvenient. Father Antonio raised his hand to the sky, as if invoking divine justice. "Francisco and Benedito Tavares, in the name of Christ and truth, I order you to abandon this property and present yourselves to the authorities in the city." Francisco laughed, but it was the desperate laugh of a cornered animal. "And who's going to make us, Father?" "You and these other cowards." It was when the second group of horsemen appeared on the road. Uniformed men that Rosa recognized as state police soldiers. Father Antonio had been cleverer than anyone had imagined. But would the arrival of the law be enough to disarm men who had already proven capable of any atrocity to protect their secrets? The sight of military uniforms transformed Francisco into a cornered beast. His small eyes shone with the dangerous light of men who know they're lost and decide to take others to the bottom with them. He shouted an order that echoed across the hill like the roar of a wounded beast. "Burn everything, now!" The thugs, moved by the promise of money and fear of consequences, threw lit torches against the jasmine curtains of the terrace. Fire licked the dry wood with hungry avidity, spreading rapidly through the vines that adorned the house like a sleeping princess's hair. Rosa grabbed the children and ran toward the back of the house, following Candida, who knew every stone, every corridor, every possible escape in that construction that had been her home for 50 years. The smell of smoke mixed with the perfume of burning jasmines, creating a fragrance that was simultaneously beautiful and terrible. "This way!" Candida shouted, guiding them through the chapel toward a side door that Rosa hadn't noticed before. "There's a path that leads directly to the church," Vicente cried desperately in his mother's arms, his delicate lungs suffering from the smoke that was rapidly thickening. Miguel ran alongside them, carrying Ana, who stumbled on her own small legs. Behind they could hear the shouts of soldiers trying to stop the arsonists, the neighing of frightened horses, and the growing crackle of fire devouring decades of history. The path through the woods was a narrow trail that wound between Aroeras and Piquis, illuminated only by the crescent moon and the sinister glow of flames consuming the big house. Candida moved with surprising agility for her age, as if urgency had restored strength to her tired muscles. "Don't look back," she whispered as they ran. "The past is burning, but the future can still be saved." Rosa obeyed the advice but could feel the heat on her back and the acrid smell of wood turning to ashes. It was as if 50 years of secrets were being offered to the flames in a terrible sacrifice. The church of San Pedro das Aguas Claras rose like a beacon of hope in the darkness, its white stones reflecting the moonlight and offering the promise of sanctuary. Father Antonio was already waiting for them at the main door, having ridden the main road while they took the secret shortcut. Come in," he urged them, closing the heavy wooden doors after they passed. "This is sacred ground. Not even men like the Tavares would dare profane a church." But Rosa knew that men capable of murder and criminal arson might not respect even the sanctity of a temple. She knelt before the altar, still holding Vicente against her chest, and whispered prayers that came out more like desperate pleas than organized requests. Ana hid behind her mother's skirts, watching shadows dance on the walls through the colored stained glass. Miguel, prematurely matured by the night's events, positioned himself near the door like a small sentinel ready to defend his family. Candida knelt beside Rosa, her trembling hands intertwined in prayer, but her eyes remained alert and vigilant. "The documents," she whispered. "We need to save the documents from the secret room." "The house is burning," Rosa replied, despair tinting her voice. "Everything will turn to ashes." "No," Candida said with surprising conviction. The chapel is made of stone, and Esperanza's secrets are well guarded. Fire can burn wood, but it cannot destroy truth. From outside came sounds of battle, shouts, sporadic gunfire, the noise of men fighting in the dark. The state police had arrived in time to arrest some of the arsonists, but Francisco and Benedito had fled to the woods, promising to return to complete their revenge. Father Antonio locked all the church entrances and lit extra candles before each saint, as if preparing the temple for a siege. He had sent one of his parishioners to ride to the city and bring reinforcements, but that would take hours. "We'll resist until dawn," he declared, his voice echoing through the church naves. God protects the innocent, and light always conquers darkness. But while Rosa rocked Vicente and tried to calm Anna's fears, a terrible question hammered in her mind. If Esperanza's secrets survived the flames, would she have enough courage to face the complete truth about her family and fight for the justice that had been denied for 50 years? And if the Tavares returned before dawn, what price would she be willing to pay to protect her children and the memory of all the unjustly killed? Dawn arrived tinted with pink and ashes, revealing the black scar where the mansion of Hacienda Santa Isabel once stood. Rosa walked among the smoking ruins with a heavy heart, Vicente sleeping in her arms after the night of terror in the church. Miraculously, the stone chapel had resisted the flames. Its walls, blackened by smoke, still guarded the secret room intact, as if the saints had extended their protective hands over Esperanza's secrets. Candida emerged from the rubble, carrying the wooden chest and the diaries, her eyes shining with an iron determination that defied the years and exhaustion. "Truth doesn't burn," she said simply, depositing the saved treasures at Rosa's feet. Miguel explored the ruins with the brave curiosity of boys, kicking extinguished embers and searching for treasures amid the ashes. It was he who found, among the remains of the library, an ancient map of the hacienda, partially burned, but still legible. "Mom, look at this!" he shouted, running to her with the charred parchment. "There's a mark here near the dam." Rosa studied the map carefully, comparing it with the descriptions from Esperanza's diaries. There it was, clearly marked, a small family cemetery that had been flooded when they built the dam in 1920. In the center, a stone cross still visible through the clear waters during dry season. "Where waters guard the dead, under the stone cross, at the depth of 3 fathoms, Rosa murmured, remembering her great-grandmother's words. It's there where she hid the evidence." The dam reflected the blue morning sky, its tranquil waters belying the secrets it guarded at the bottom. Rosa left the children in Candida's and Father Antonio's care, who had remained with them throughout the dawn, and walked to the shore. The water was cold and clear, allowing glimpses of the rocky bottom where dark shadows marked the remains of the old cemetery. Rosa had always been a good swimmer, a rare skill among women of her generation, but had never dove searching for secrets buried 50 years ago. She took a deep breath and submerged, feeling the water chill her limbs as she descended toward the bottom. With each stroke, the world above became more distant and silent, until only she and the submerged shadows of the past remained. There was the stone cross, exactly as Esperanza had described, half buried in mud, but still recognizable by its proportions, and the angels carved at its extremities. Rosa swam around the submerged monument, looking for signs of something hidden at its base. It was when she touched the north face of the cross that she felt the difference. A section of stone was loose, as if it had been purposely worked to serve as a hiding place. With fingers that were beginning to tingle from cold, she managed to move the false stone and reveal a cavity protected by a waxed leather envelope. Rosa's heart beat like a hammer against her chest when she emerged from the waters, holding the treasure that Esperanza had saved for posterity. Her hands trembled, from cold, from emotion, from fear of what she might find. Candida helped her out of the water and wrapped her in a wool shawl that smelled of lavender and thyme. Together, they carefully opened the protective envelope, revealing documents that seemed as fresh as if they had been written the day before. There were original deeds of the hacienda, dated 1869, establishing Joaquim Andrade as legitimate owner. There was Esperanza's will, leaving all lands to her direct descendants. And there was something more terrible, letters confessing the crime, written in Tomas Andrade's own hand in his final moments, when remorse finally conquered greed. But the most important document was a meticulously drawn genealogical tree, tracing the Andrade lineage through generations until reaching a name that made Rosa stagger: Isabel Andrade da Silva, married to a local merchant, mother of Maria da Silva, grandmother of Antonia da Silva Tavares, great-grandmother of Rosa Tavares. Rosa wasn't just a descendant of the legitimate owners of the hacienda. She was the direct heir, the last of the lineage that had been stolen and silenced for half a century. Her hands trembled as she held the papers that changed everything, not just her life, but the destiny of her children, and the memory of all the dead who clamored for justice. But would Rosa have enough strength to face the Tavares in court and restore her family's name? Or would the same men who had killed her husband find a way to silence her before the truth came to light? The months that followed seemed like a whirlwind of lawyers, courts, and testimonies that echoed through the dusty halls of the courthouse in Tres Corazones. Rosa had found a young, idealistic lawyer, Dr. Rafael Santos, recently graduated and thirsty for justice, who accepted her case even knowing he would face the political influence of the Tavares. Vicente had grown and strengthened during this period, playing in the gardens of the modest boarding house where they now lived in the city, while Rosa fought to prove rights that should be obvious. Ana had learned to read with Candida, who had become like a second grandmother to the children, telling ancient stories and teaching prayers that passed from generation to generation like invisible inheritances. Miguel, now 13 years old, accompanied each hearing with attentive eyes and clenched fists, absorbing lessons about courage and persistence that no school could teach. He had sworn that one day he would become a lawyer to defend people like his mother. The trial was scheduled for a cold September morning, when the first spring rains washed the dirt streets of the city. Rosa, dressed in her best clothes, a navy blue dress that had belonged to her mother, gathered her hair in a low bun and walked to the courthouse with the silent dignity of a queen going to face her destiny. Francisco and Benedito entered escorted, wearing handcuffs that shone like bracelets of shame. 50 years of impunity had ended the night they tried to burn the hacienda. Police had found them hiding in a cave, trembling like cornered animals. Domingo Silva gave his testimony with a firm voice, looking directly into the eyes of José's murderers while relating every detail of the terrible night. Father Antonio confirmed the confessions he had heard in sacramental secrecy, breaking silence only because human justice sometimes needs to supersede divine rituals. Candida took the witness stand carrying her 70 years like a crown of wisdom. Her clear voice echoed through the courtroom as she told the story of Esperanza and Joaquim, of 50 years of silence and patience, of secrets guarded like treasures until the right moment came to reveal them. The documents found in the dam were examined by specialists who confirmed their authenticity. The original deeds, Esperanza's will, Tomas Andrade's confession letters, everything formed an unbreakable chain of evidence that re-established historical truth. When Rosa finally took the stand, her voice didn't tremble. She told her story simply, without ornaments or emotional appeals, letting the facts speak for themselves. She spoke of José, of the love they had built together, of the children she now raised alone, of the dignity that no injustice had managed to break. "I don't seek revenge," she said at the end of her testimony, looking directly at the judge. "I seek only that my children grow up knowing the truth about their family and that the dead finally rest in peace." The sentence came on an October afternoon, when rains had washed the world and left everything greener and more alive. Francisco was sentenced to 25 years in prison for qualified homicide and criminal arson. Benedito received 15 years as accomplice and participant in the crimes, but more important than the sentences was the decision that restored Hacienda Santa Isabel to its legitimate heirs. Rosa Tavares, now officially recognized as Rosa Andrade Silva Tavares, became owner of more than 200 acres of fertile land, including the ruined house that would be rebuilt with the love and care it always deserved. As she left the courthouse accompanied by her children and Candida, Rosa felt for the first time in years that she could breathe completely. The weight of injustice had been lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a different responsibility, to honor the memory of ancestors and build a worthy future for generations to come. On the road leading back to the hacienda, she stopped before the dam where so much suffering had begun and whispered a prayer of gratitude to the waters that had kept secrets until the right moment came to reveal them. But how would it be to start over in a place that carried so many memories, and what strength would Rosa find to transform ruins into hope? The winter of 1974 came gently to the lands of Hacienda Santa Isabel, bringing generous rains that washed away the ashes of the burned house and made wild flowers bloom among the rubble. Rosa walked along the stone paths that Miguel and other men from the village had rebuilt, carrying Vicente, who now spoke sweet words and pointed at every little bird with the enthusiasm proper to 2-year-olds. Anna ran ahead, her braids dancing in the wind while chasing butterflies that seemed to have returned to the hacienda as messengers of better times. The girl had gained color in her cheeks and laughter in her eyes since leaving the dusty boarding house in the city to live in the countryside again. The reconstruction began with the chapel, which Candida insisted was the heart of any blessed property. Men from the region worked voluntarily, bringing stones from the river and Arera wood, singing old songs while raising the walls that would protect new secrets. This time, secrets of joy and hope. Rosa had decided to keep the secret room, but now it would guard Esperanza's diaries and family documents as living memory, not as hidden testimony. A small bronze plaque would be placed at the entrance, in memory of Esperanza Andrade Silva and all who fought for truth. The main mansion was slowly rising like a phoenix of bricks and dreams. Rosa had hired a master builder from the city, Don Joaquim, whose name she considered a blessing, and together they planned a house that would honor the past but embrace the future. Wide terraces so children could play even in the rain, large windows that would let in all the light of the world, a library where Miguel could study to realize his dream of becoming a lawyer. Candida gained a special room on the ground floor, overlooking the garden that she herself redesigned with the patience of decades. Climbing roses returned to embrace the columns, but now shared space with new jasmines and a pitanga tree that Anna had planted, so the house would have sweet flavor. The nights were the most magical. Rosa sat on the temporary terrace they had built among the ruins and watched the stars that seemed brighter over lands free of lies. Vicente slept in her lap. Anna told stories to her cornhusk dolls. Miguel read law books borrowed from Dr. Rafael Santos, and Candida knitted blankets that smelled of wool and blessings. Money from selling some distant acres had allowed not only reconstruction, but also improvements to the land. New equipment, selected seeds, an artesian well that brought crystal water closer to the house. Rosa discovered she had natural talent for managing the property, making decisions with a mixture of feminine intuition and wisdom inherited from ancestors. Neighbors who had previously looked at her with pity or distrust now treated her with respect. Donna Rosa Andrade, as she had come to be known, became an example that life can be rebuilt even after the worst storms. It was on one of those starry nights that Candida called Rosa for a private conversation. They walked to the edge of the dam, where the stone cross now emerged partially from the water during dry season, transformed into a memorial marker for all who wanted to remember the importance of truth. "Child," Candida said with her voice that was a whisper of ancient leaves, "I feel my mission is ending." Rosa felt a tightness in her chest. In recent months, Candida had become more than a friend. She was the grandmother her children never had, the counselor she herself needed, the bridge between the painful past and the promising future. "Don't talk like that," Rosa said, taking the old woman's wrinkled hands in hers. "You were part of this victory. Now you need to stay to see the fruits." Candida smiled, her eyes reflecting starlight like small lagoons of wisdom. "I promised Esperanza I would keep the secrets until someone of her blood came to seek justice. The promise has been fulfilled. Now I can rest in peace." Rosa understood this wasn't about haste to depart, but about a deep tranquility of someone who had completed their mission on Earth. Candida had been guardian of truths for 50 years, and now could entrust that responsibility to younger and equally worthy hands. But what other surprises did destiny hold for Rosa, and how would she deal with the responsibility of being not just heir to lands, but guardian of memories and hopes? The spring of 1975 painted Hacienda Santa Isabel with colors Rosa had never imagined possible. The coffee plantations, replanted with selected seedlings, extended across the hills like green carpets dotted with little white flowers that perfumed the air with promises of abundant future harvests. Vicente, now 2.5 years old, ran through the corridors of the rebuilt house pronouncing new words every day, his robust health belying the fragility of his first months of life. Ana, at 6 years old, had become Vicente's little teacher, teaching him little songs that Candida had taught her, and caring for him with the maternal affection that was born naturally in her generous heart. Miguel had turned 14 with the maturity of a grown man, dividing his time between studies at the city school and practical learning of managing a rural property. Dr. Rafael Santos had offered to guide his law studies, impressed with the boy's natural intelligence and thirst for justice. Rosa flourished like a plant that had finally found the ideal soil. Her hair shone with golden reflections from the country sun. Her skin had gained the healthy color of someone who worked outdoors for pleasure and not necessity. Her eyes radiated the peace of someone who had found their true place in the world. The new house was a poem of stone and wood, where each room told a story of beginning again. Miguel's library occupied what had once been the old master's game room, its shelves filled with books that arrived regularly by mail. Candida's kitchen was the pulsing heart of the house. Always smelling of fresh bread and homemade sweets, she prepared to receive visits that became increasingly frequent. Father Antonio came every week to celebrate Mass in the restored chapel, and his homilies always included reflections on the importance of truth and persistence in the fight for justice. The small stone church had become a pilgrimage site for people who came from far away to learn the story of Rosa and Esperanza. It was on one of those generous sunny mornings that correspondence arrived that would again change the course of events. Miguel brought the sealed envelope, with official stamp and sender from Belo Horizonte, addressed to Mrs. Rosa Andrade Silva Tavares, Hacienda Santa Isabel. Rosa opened the letter with fingers that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from expectation. It was a communication from the state government, informing that the story of Hacienda Santa Isabel had reached the ears of higher authorities, and that the property would be officially recognized as historical and cultural heritage of the state of Minas Gerais. "What does this mean, Mama?" Anna asked, observing her mother's radiant face. "It means our story will never again be forgotten," Rosa replied, embracing her daughter against her chest. "It means other people who suffered injustices will know that truth always finds a way to shine." Candida, who was knitting on the nearby terrace, smiled with the deep satisfaction of someone who had planted a tree and now saw its ripe fruits. At 72 years old, she maintained crystalline lucidity and the sweetness that had made her the perfect guardian of Esperanza's secrets. "Little Isabel would be proud," she murmured, her fingers working the wool threads with the same precision with which they had kept memories for decades. That afternoon, Rosa walked alone to the dam, carrying a crown of wildflowers that Anna had made especially for the occasion. The water reflected the cloudless blue sky, and the stone cross emerged partially from the surface like a natural monument to the memory of the wronged. She placed the crown on the cross and whispered a prayer that mixed gratitude and promises for the future. She promised she would tell Esperanza's story to her children and grandchildren, that she would keep the hacienda prosperous and productive, that she would use her position to help other families who suffered similar injustices. The wind blew gently over the waters, carrying the perfume of new jasmines and creating ripples that seemed to wave in approval. Rosa felt a warm presence beside her, not an apparition but a blessing, as if Esperanza could finally rest in peace, knowing her lineage had been restored and honored. But there was still one last revelation waiting for Rosa, a discovery that would complete the circle of the story and reveal the true meaning of her victory. The autumn of 1975 arrived loaded with golden hues and mysteries that seemed to whisper among the leaves falling like farewell confetti. Rosa was organizing the last documents of the hacienda for the historical declaration process when she discovered, at the bottom of Esperanza's chest, a sealed envelope that had gone unnoticed in all her previous explorations. The paper was different from the others, thicker with a quality that suggested special importance. On the outside, handwriting that Rosa recognized as Esperanza's had written only, "For my descendant, when justice is done." With hands that trembled with expectation and apprehension, Rosa broke the seal carefully preserved for 50 years. Inside, she found a letter and something that made her stagger. A faded photograph, but still clear enough to show a young woman of impressive beauty holding a baby in her arms. The letter was written in the same delicate handwriting as the diaries, but the words carried desperate urgency. "If you are reading this, my dear descendant, it is because truth finally triumphed over lies. There is a secret I kept even from Candida, for it was too dangerous to share while the Tavares held power. The baby in the photograph is my daughter Isabel, born 3 months after the death of my beloved Joaquim, but she did not die in childbirth, as I told everyone. I feared the Tavares would discover her existence and kill her to eliminate any trace of our lineage. I managed to save her by secretly delivering her to a family of honest merchants who were moving to another city. They promised to raise her as their own daughter and never reveal her true origin. I died pretending I had lost her, but knowing my blood would continue alive somewhere. On the photograph I engraved the name of the adoptive family and the city where they were headed. If God allows justice to be done, perhaps my descendant can find Isabel's descendants and complete our family scattered by the winds of necessity. Rosa looked again at the photograph with eyes that burned with emotion. On the back, in tiny but still legible letters, was written, Santos family, Pozos de Caldas, 1926. Santos, the same surname as the young lawyer who had fought beside her in the courts. With her heart beating like a procession drum, Rosa ran to the city, carrying the photograph and letter like sacred treasures. Dr. Rafael Santos received her in his modest office, with the kindness that had always characterized him. But when Rosa showed him the documents, the young man's face paled, as if he had seen a ghost. "My grandmother was named Isabel Santos," he whispered, his hands trembling as he held the photograph. "She always said she was adopted, that her real family had been lost in difficult times. We never imagined that." Rosa felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The lawyer who had fought for her justice, the young idealist who had believed in her cause when everyone doubted, was her own distant cousin, descendant of the same Esperanza, member of the same family scattered by fear and necessity. "Rafael," she said, her voice little more than a whisper, "you didn't fight for a client. You fought for your own family." The two looked at each other in silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the revelation. Destiny had plotted an impossible reunion, making the separated branches of the family tree meet again to restore the justice that had been denied to their common ancestors. Rafael showed photographs of his grandmother, Isabel Santos, a woman who had lived to 85 years old, always carrying an inexplicable melancholy and nostalgia for something she couldn't name. She had died a few years before, whispering in her last moments the name Esperanza, which everyone had interpreted as a religious reference. "She knew," Rafael murmured, observing the similarities between the old photograph and portraits of his grandmother already elderly. Deep in her heart, she always knew there was a family waiting for her somewhere. Rosa felt tears of mixed joy and sadness run down her cheeks. Joy for discovering she wasn't alone in the world, that there were other descendants of Esperanza scattered through life. Sadness because Isabel had died without knowing the truth about her origins, without knowing she belonged to a lineage of strong women who fought against injustices. But would this revelation be the end of the story, or just the beginning of a new journey that would definitively unite the scattered branches of the Andrade family? Christmas 1975 at Hacienda Santa Isabel was a celebration that echoed through the hills like celestial music. Rosa had invited Rafael Santos and his entire family, wife, 2 small children, and the parents who had raised Isabel Santos as a daughter of their heart, to spend the festivities at the property that now represented more than reclaimed lands. It symbolized the reunion of a family scattered by time and circumstances. Candida, now 73 years old, with the wisdom of someone who had seen circles close and stories find their proper endings, prepared a dinner that smelled of ancestral traditions and future promises. The large Aroera wood table, carved especially for the new house, brought together 3 generations of Esperanza Andrade Silva's descendants in a communion that seemed blessed by the saints. Vicente, about to turn 3, ran between the adult's legs like a little prince of his own enchanted court, his golden hair reflecting the light of candles that illuminated the dining room. Anna, at 7 years old, had become the perfect little hostess, serving homemade sweets to Rafael's children, with the natural grace that seemed a genetic inheritance of the Andrade women. Miguel, now 15 years old, with an unwavering determination to follow Rafael's footsteps in law, discussed famous cases with the passion of someone who had already found their vocation. Dr. Rafael Santos had offered to be his official mentor, promising that one day they would work together, defending families facing injustices similar to those they themselves had overcome. Rosa observed the abundant table and faces illuminated by happiness, feeling a fullness that transcended any material wealth. The hacienda prospered. The coffee plantations promised the largest harvest in decades. Dairy cattle raising had expanded. The house received visitors from various parts of the country who came to learn the story that had become regional legend. But more important than economic prosperity was the emotional richness that now filled every corner of that blessed property. The children grew up knowing their true history, proud to belong to a lineage of people who never bowed before injustice. Adults worked with purpose, knowing that each brick laid, each seed planted, each document preserved was a victory against forgetfulness and lies. Father Antonio celebrated a special mass in the restored chapel, his words echoing among the stones that had witnessed so much suffering and now radiated peace. During the homily, he spoke about divine patience, about how justice sometimes takes time to arrive, but never fails to manifest when there are pure hearts willing to fight for it. "The story of Esperanza and Rosa," he said, looking directly at the two women, one alive and radiant, the other present only in memory but equally real, teaches us that true love is stronger than death, that truth is more lasting than lies, and that hope is the most powerful of human forces. After Mass, Rosa walked alone to the dam, carrying a crown of fresh flowers and a heart overflowing with gratitude. The water reflected the stars like diamonds scattered over black velvet, and the stone cross emerged from the surface like a beacon of memory and guidance. She placed the flowers on the submerged monument and whispered words that were simultaneously prayer and promise. "Esperanza, my dear great-grandmother, your mission has been fulfilled. Your children have returned home. Your land has been returned to the right hands. Your story will be told and retold so that other people know it's worth fighting for truth." The wind blew gently over the waters, carrying the perfume of jasmines that now grew free and abundant through the restored gardens. Rosa felt a warm presence envelop her like a maternal embrace, not phantasmagorical but profoundly real, as if all generations of Andrade women were there to bless the future that stretched promising ahead. When she returned to the house, she found Candida on the terrace knitting in the soft starlight, a smile of absolute contentment illuminating her face, wrinkled by time and wisdom. "Is it finished?" the old woman asked without raising her eyes from the knitting. "It's beginning," Rosa replied, sitting beside the woman who had been guardian of secrets and was now witness to redemption. "The past has been healed, the present is blessed, and the future is a promise my children will carry forward." Candida smiled, her skilled fingers working the wool threads as if weaving tangible hopes. "Then my vigil can end in peace," she murmured. "The family is reunited, the land is restored, truth has triumphed." Rosa held Candida's wrinkled hand between hers, feeling the calm and regular pulse of a woman who had fulfilled her mission on earth and could now contemplate the complete work. That night, under a starry sky that seemed to bless Hacienda Santa Isabel with its eternal light, Rosa understood she had become more than heir to lands and traditions. She had become guardian of a legacy that extended beyond time and circumstances, a legacy of courage, persistence, and unshakable faith in the final triumph of justice. And when her children grew up and had children of their own, the story of Esperanza and Rosa would be told around the same hearths, proving forever that true love never dies, that truth always finds a way to shine, and that hope is the most powerful force in the human universe.